They exist. Photos of men, women, the elderly, so many of children, and even babies. Their eyes glassy and fixed, perhaps closed and painted on, unnaturally white. Skin sometimes mottled with bruise or so perfect it appears as delicate as china. Bodies both limp and stiff, sometimes posed to seem pensive or allowed to slack in a position reminiscent of deep sleep. But something seems not quite right about the photos. It could be just one person with these unsettling qualities in the photo, or it could be an entire family leaning on one another in endless slumber. Maybe you've stumbled across photos like these while sneaking around in your great-aunt's attic on a rainy afternoon. Or you've taken a chance glance at a few online, wondering, how can these exist? Why would anyone want to take photos of the dead? In this episode of Creeparoni's Truth of Tales, we'll take a closer look at the macabre practice of post-mortem photography, a subsection of memento mori, reminders of the reality of death. For more episodes of the real story behind creepy tales, make sure you like this video, subscribe, comment, and click the bell to be notified of new episodes as they're released. Many times truth seems stranger than fiction, and in the case of post-mortem photography, the truth is sadder than fiction too. We now live in a world where an entire human's existence can be documented with not only photos, but videos and sound clips, archived images of opinions shared, digital fingerprints, footprints, connections with others. For those of us in this digital age, proof our individual selves were here on this planet will likely carry on far longer than our physical bodies will. But historically, so many people have been born and died without any remnant remaining for those in perpetuity to see. Millions upon millions of smiles that were only known to the few people who saw those smiles in real life, in real time. It may be difficult for us to comprehend the attitudes towards death held by those who came before us because, for them, the sight of their loved one at the time of death would be their last vision of them. Then, the forgetting would begin, without physical reminders of their loved one's intricate faces, the shape of eyes and curve of an eyebrow, the pout of a baby's lip, all lost to time. Prior to the mid-1800s, memory was basically the only truly accessible tool families and friends had of cherishing the moments shared with a loved one after death. And memory is fleeting. Perhaps in a few years, you may not even remember if your deceased child's eyes were blue or green, or were they gray? Imagine the questions that would keep you up at night, and the sense that all recollection of your lost love was sand falling through your fingers, diminishing by the hour, minute, second. With that in mind, maybe you can understand now why it would feel so important to have just one image to serve as a reminder, to help your memory hold more tightly to someone you would never physically hold again. Paintings on cave walls illustrate the desire to share who we are and what we do with future generations. For hundreds of years, painted portraits of families were an option available only to the most elite and aristocratic. They took long periods of time to complete, and one had to commission a painter for the duration of the painting's creation. That being said, a painting at best is still no true reproduction of a human form, merely an artist's rendering which was often embellished to make the subjects of the portraits appear more attractive. Photography, even in its infant form, provided a more accurate representation of a person's true physical features. Daguerreotype photography was invented around the mid-1800s and made photography more widely accessible to the common person. It was conducted much differently than modern photography, with the exposure printed directly to a piece of silver or other metal. However, though more could have a photo performed than have a portrait painted, the time and financial expense of a photograph meant that a person might only have 1 or 2 photographs of themselves ever taken. Photography was reserved for what was viewed as the moments of highest importance, and, for some, a death photograph was the only photograph of them ever made. The subjects of postmortem photography are varied, and by looking at death photos you can get an impression of the scientific limitations of the time. Towards the mid-1800s, when postmortem photography became widespread, children only had around 60% chance of making it to age 5, and adult males and females both had life expectancies that hovered around merely 40 years old. Our current world is accustomed to antibiotics, vaccines, regular health checkups, and other accommodations that were not available to people 100 years ago. Thus, when a strange infection occurred in one family member, it may spread to the others of the family as they took care of the sick. Entire families fell from diseases such as diphtheria, smallpox, tuberculosis, and even influenza. Thus, many post-mortem photos show groups of the dead laying with or propped against each other. It may have been the family's first and final picture. Almost all births were home births. Thus, women and their babies had no access to life-saving procedures like blood transfusion or proper cesarean section. Women would often become pregnant many times only to have several stillbirths, or children that died within a few hours or days of delivery. Some families embrace the grief of losing a child by obtaining a post-mortem photograph. Too often, the photo might also contain a mother who died of complications along with her baby. She may be posed to cradle the child and appear so much like she may have appeared had they both survived. The techniques of performing post-mortem photography varied as widely as the subjects themselves. Sometimes, the eyes are left open so that the photograph mimics life, and, in some cases, when the lids would naturally fall, the photographer may pin the eyelids back, resulting in a shocked expression, or paint eyes upon the eyelids, or the developed photograph. The latter method rarely presented results that would appear convincing by today's standards, giving the photograph a distinctly ghostly appearance. Children were often left laying upon a pillow or stuffed animal in the floor, or partly covered by a blanket in a crib, to give the impression that the child is only taking an innocent nap, that he may awake at any moment. It may seem as though these macabre photographs with their unsettling themes and images would be meant for private reflection within a family photo album. The truth is the opposite. Due to the prevalence of early death during the 1800s and early 1900s, post-mortem photography was often placed in a public area of the home, such as the living room, to pay constant tribute to the deceased. The photos were not only reserved for singular viewing by a family member on special days, like the anniversary of a death. Rather, the death photo was revered as a reminder to the living not only that they too would die, but that those who were dead had once lived and been cared for. No doubt, death photos and other memento mori allowed living persons to acclimate themselves to the idea of death, an inescapable inevitability that would likely come for them and those they loved sooner rather than later. The subject of death seems more and more taboo as the lifespan of humans becomes longer and longer, thanks to science and modern medicine. Thus, the photos of the deceased from generations past are shocking to us. Perhaps it is also incredulous to you that post-mortem photography, though less popular, still exists today. Unlike the death photos of those 100 years prior, photos of the dead are usually kept in private and not displayed on living room walls. It may be one print in the back of a photo album, or one snapshot from a funeral in your phone. Times have changed, yet we still long to hold on to the images of those special to us, and a death photo may help a person accept the fate of one they loved. Would it surprise you to know that my family continues this custom? Growing up, I was confronted with pictures of deceased relatives, usually on the day of their burial, dressed nicely and tucked cleanly into a casket. I once asked my mother why we did this, why we were so insistent upon making that final photograph. Her answer was simple. Death is a part of life that should be cherished. We are unable to have one without the other. Although a less popular practice, post-mortem photography holds great significance in some cultures. In parts of India, it is said to be a common practice to take a photograph of the dead before they are burnt in pyres, to have a reminder of the physical body before the soul reincarnates to its next form. No matter the meaning behind them, photos of the dead will always have a haunting quality about them. The unnaturalness of the poses, the stiffness or looseness of the subject's musculature, the eyes that are merely specks of time-worn white paint, or shocked eyes that look out into the beyond. These visions will always make some hearts quicken and some hair on necks stand attentively. Next time you have the opportunity to view a post-mortem photograph, remember that you are not much different from the person in the picture, aside from the fact that you still have air in your lungs and fresh blood running through your veins. You are as they once were, and one day you will be as they now are.